So, as we delve into today's discussion, let's draw on Harry's wisdom to challenge ourselves to lead with purpose, anticipate the unexpected, and remember in decisions big and small, we are all those guys. Please join me in welcoming Harry Kramer.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I always worry about an introduction like that because it's going to only go downhill from here. So it really is my pleasure to be all with you today. And I always know, as my former students know, I always prefer more of a dialogue than a monologue. So I appreciate folks can kind of jump in. You can ask any questions that you'd like. Because we've got experts like Mark here, this is very easy because, as my former students know, a big part of leadership is delegation. So if you ask me something pretty simple, I'll take it on. But if it's more cerebral, thought-provoking, I have both Mark and my former students. So I'm in a very relaxed mode this afternoon. This is good. And so the question is, we want to make acquisitions. What are the areas you really need to focus on to significantly increase the probability of success? So there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, but as my former students know, I ended up coming up with 7 reasons why many of these fail. And then, being an optimistic guy, what do you really need to do to increase the probability that you're among the 20% and that your track record is much higher than that when you're making acquisitions? That's a little bit of the thought process. So as I go through these, any one of these I can do like an hour class on, as my students know. So this whole thing, I'm going to zip through this thing in about 45 minutes with you folks jumping in, asking any questions as we go through this, and hopefully we can all learn a little bit from the exercise. And what you'll notice as I go through these, most of them are actually fairly simple, because I think most things really are simple, but we have a tendency to make these things very, very complicated, right? So I'm going to go through 7 of these things for you. The first one, and it's a little interesting to me that how the simplicity is that the majority of companies really don't understand what they're really good at. I was struck by Mark's comment of, we're going to focus on B2B, we're going to focus on certain types. It was very clear. They made a lot of acquisitions, but this was a group of people who knew exactly what they wanted to focus on. And at Baxter, I used to tease people that sometimes we'd say, hey, you know what, we're really, really good at like 9 or 10 things. Well, if you really analyzed it, and we really took the time, I realized sort of bad news and good news. The bad news is, I decided we were only really, really good at 2 or 3 things. Now, the good news is, most companies, I realized, aren't good at anything, which is the reason why most companies don't exist for very long, right? But if you know what you're really good at, and you stay pretty focused on that, that can be a big help to you. And what I realized very often, in fact, this idea of what are you really good at and focusing on it, it's a little bit of the work that Jim Collins, many of you are aware of, the Good to Great fellow, figured out a long time ago. He used to call it sort of, what's your hedgehog? What are you really good at? What drives your economic engine? What are you really passionate about? And if you stick to that, and you're very serious about that, you'll do really well. But of course, what ends up happening? I mean, people are pretty smart. What happens? So rather than saying, we could do all these things, here are the 2 or 3 things we're really, really good at, there's sort of this view of, we're really good at this. I bet we could do this. It's not that far off the track. I mean, I bet we could do that too. The problem is, there's a couple people that are really, really good at that. They're going to jump on you as soon as you try that, which doesn't mean occasionally you may not try to do that, but you better understand what the odds are and what you've got to deal with. What are you really, really good at? And the example that I like to use, because I'll always give you simple examples if you jump in, a good example is Baxter, if it had anything to do with plastic component parts that would be used in critical care situations, that was something we were unbelievable. But every once in a while, early on, there'd be this view of, oh, we could do that too. And the example I always remember early on, and I was a pretty young analyst in the finance department, somebody said, you know, well, we've got this great relationship with hospitals. We're serving 6,500 hospitals all over the United States. You know what? One of the problems that hospitals have is systems. Of course, this is 30 years ago. It's sort of interesting. It's the same problem today. And you know what? I bet if we focused on helping hospitals with their systems, that would be a phenomenal bundling opportunity for everything else we're doing with hospitals. And I can remember as a young guy thinking to myself, I don't know much. I'm pretty new here out of Kellogg, but we don't seem to do our own systems that well. And we're going to do this for hospitals? That's kind of a fascinating idea. Well, guess what? It blew up. It wasn't very good. And a great example was if it had anything to do in a budget meeting, because I was like one of these budget analysts, if it had anything to do with a budget thing that was doing for IV solutions, intravenous fluids. Everybody who ran that business was in the room, and we weren't talking about dollars or cents. We were talking about mils of parts of a cent. And then when the guys came in to talk about what was going on with the IC systems, it'd be a little bit like, you know what, we're not sure what you're talking about, but if we spend another 10 million, could you kind of fix it? So we're going to go from ground level to, we don't know what we're talking about. So this concept of what are you really good at and focusing on it, that's sort of the first item I think about. Okay? The second one, which I think becomes pretty important, which you'd think would be pretty basic, anybody that's got an education in finance but isn't, is that the second reason a lot of these fail is people don't really seem to understand economics. They really don't. And they get really wound up with things like, oh, we can buy this for 10 times earnings, or we can buy this for 10 times whatever, okay? Well, that's sort of interesting because I love, Madison, I would love to sell to somebody to something who tells me that they're gonna pay 10 times, because that last year, I don't hire any sales guys, I don't do any investments or whatever, and instead of earning 10 million, I earn 20 million, so now I'm gonna make twice the amount of money selling to somebody who, regardless of, does the slope of this growth thing go like this, or does it come down? And it amazes me how many really bright people get focused on an accounting principle, or they're looking at a year rather than thinking, what really is the future of this business? And is this a business that you can actually buy for less than what the overall value really is? It's remarkable, and I can remember at part of the business roundtable, I'd come to Washington a couple times a year, and I'd run into another CEO, and I'm reading in the Wall Street Journal on the way there, they bought this company, and I'd say, well, my goodness, it sounds like you spent a lot of money. Oh, no, we only spent 10 times. Really? So you're focusing on just what 1 year's piece of it is, right? And of course, the other side of this, for those of you that get into this accounting, I thought was always very interesting, is that some people would say, well, we'd like to buy this company, but it's going to be fantastic because it's accretive. Of course, you say to yourself, what's that mean? Well, it's because our earnings per share will go up, right? And I always said, you don't have to be an accounting genius to realize if you've got whatever P multiple you have, if you buy a company with a lower P multiple than yours, by definition, your EPS goes up, okay? The value of your stock goes down, okay? And of course, the opposite is also true, right? I've seen people would say, hey, you know what, Harry, that looks like a great acquisition. And we think it's really worth 200 million in a net present value, and we could only pay 100 million for it, but we really can't do it. Why? Well, because it's dilutive. What does that mean? Well, because our P multiple would go down. Well, your P multiple would go down, but if the actual value's higher, that would make a lot of economic sense to do, right? So this basic lack of economics, lack of understanding what creates value. So again, trying to be an optimist, if you know what you're really good at and you stick with it, number one, and you understand the difference between economics and accounting, you could do remarkably well, okay? But a lot of people miss this. A lot of people miss it. The third one, and I always tease my friends, particularly with a marketing background on this one, is they'll say, well, we're going to buy these companies because it's strategic, okay? And one of the division presidents at Baxter one time said to me, you got to buy this. It's strategic. I said, well, is it economic? And he said, here, it's very strategic. And I said, well, okay, I appreciate that, and I'm not a marketing whiz, but what about economics? And the guy said, what do you mean economics? And he said, well, he said, Harry, this is strategic way beyond net present value. Okay, now, let's go real slow for those of us that have taken it. There is nothing beyond net present value. Okay, there isn't. No, he said, Harry, I mean just way out there. I know, we took that into account when we calculated the net present value. That was his last day as a division president, by the way. Okay, so, and by the way, when I always say, and my students know this, I always say I have very few answers, but I have a lot of opinions, right? So I don't do Q&A, I do Q&O, question and opinion, you remember that? And one of my opinions is, and by the way, even CEOs, CFOs will disagree with this, I would argue if it isn't economic, by definition, it cannot be strategic, right? But that gets very confused because people say, and I had a boss one time and said, no, but Harry, you need to get beyond the numbers here. Okay, what does that mean? Well, Harry, I think this could be a value in the future. Well, guess what? Show me the scenario of what would have to happen that enough value would be created in the future that this would really make sense. Harry, I kind of think you're thinking of small-minded. Well, when I became the CEO, I basically made it very, very clear. If it isn't economic, go crazy. It's not strategic. Okay, so that's the third one. By the way, any one of these we could spend an hour on, so you guys can just jump in. By the way, the fourth one is a little interesting because I've seen this happen way too often, and I'm sure Mark has seen this a lot too. Is that people get emotional about making acquisitions. Okay. And what do I mean by that? Okay, well, we've spent time on this. We've looked at it. We've analyzed it. We've brought in experts like this firm to help us. And maybe after 4 or 5 months, we say, you know what? Pencils down. We just don't think this makes sense. And then usually there's somebody who says, wait a minute. We spent 6 months on this. We spent a lot of time on this. And I literally had a head of business development one time who said, Harry, I think the team's going to be disappointed. We spent 6 months on this. And I would always tease them and say, well, we've been paying you, right? I mean, I'm paying you, all right? Am I going to just make an acquisition just because I'm paying you? Well, Harry, you know, people are going to be a little disappointed. Well, I'm disappointed in you, okay? Because if it makes sense, we're going to do it. But we're not going to get emotional. By the way, the other way we get emotional goes like this, all right? It's like Jack and I, we're looking at this deal, but we're very disciplined. And we basically say, we're not going to spend more than $50 million. Because if we take a look at what's the combination of growth, margins, working capital, cash flow, cost of capital, we're not going to pay more than $50 million, okay? And then all of a sudden, the banker, my friends, the banker sometimes will say, Harry, your competitor is going to buy this. And if he buys this, that's going to be a real problem. So Harry, we can't lose. We can't lose. I think we're going to have to offer 60. Well, yeah, but is it worth, Harry, we cannot lose this. To which my whole comment is, if you define winning as paying more than anybody else, you know, you win, but your shareholder loses. And you can convince yourself of a lot of things. You can say, well, geez, we just can't let that person have it. Well, what's it worth? What's the impact on us if we don't buy it? Right? So you can look at the economics behind that, right? But you better be very, very careful, because sooner or later, if every time somebody's going to do something, you figure out economically it's in your interest to buy it rather than them, what's the cumulative value of you being able to do that? Maybe you're in the wrong business. Maybe you're in the wrong industry. Right? So this whole concept of, I really want to make sure that it's what I do well, it's economic, I'm not overpaying for it, and I have no reason to get emotional about it whatsoever. Yeah, just time. By the way, that's the next rule in terms of what you don't do. And by the way, I'll be very open. This is why you can challenge. I actually think bankers add a tremendous amount of value to the process. What do I mean by that? Unless you're like ITW, where it's amazing, you guys are doing a deal a week. But for most industrial companies, you're doing a couple deals a year. Well, your main business is not doing acquisitions. Your main deal is running operating businesses, doing research, doing investments, manufacturing. So in my mind, another opinion, I think bankers add a tremendous amount of value. Where do I mean by that? They may find out that Khalid's company is available, all right? And I don't even know he's available because it's a private company, it's in Minnesota. And not only does the banker know he exists as a private company that I didn't know, he also knows that the guy who's running it is 75 years old, it's a private company, his kids don't want to be involved, and the bankers and the lawyers are telling him that, you're completely undiversified and you're illiquid. And Harry, I think I even know how much he'd be willing to sell the company for. 1, 2, 3, 4, this is all fantastic, okay? My only sensitivity is, and my highly strong opinion, is that the banker cannot tell you what it's worth. All the stuff that you're doing and the knowledge base you've got related to customers, products, segmentation, whatever. How a banker, but of course I've talked to CEOs that use the bank and they'll say, Harry, I got the blue book. I mean, I got all the ratios and so on, and Harry, they said this was a really good deal. No, they can tell you it's available and they can even tell you what he wants. But the only person who can decide what it is worth to us is you, okay? I mean, think about it. You're living the company 24/7, and everything you know about that industry, particularly if it's the area that you're really good at. But to have the banker tell you what it's worth, I think is a serious problem. So this whole idea of not getting emotional, using bankers for what they're really good at, but you've got to decide what it's worth to you, is the way I think about it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Any comment about those? Now I get to where it gets interesting to me. The sixth one is, in my mind, all about why do they go wrong? They go wrong because people don't take into account the people and the cultural impact, which I have to say, and this was one that took me a while to learn, because having a finance background and being a really strong financial background, I kind of thought of it, hey, if the numbers are all there and the rationale and all the things that Mike's talking about are there, well then, this is going to actually be a pretty good deal. What it took me a while to appreciate was, at the end of the day, that's great, but it's all about people. And if at the end of the day, the people don't work, it's not going to happen. Examples. let's say Anthony and I've got a very strong company. We're very, very good at it, and we're mostly trained as engineers, okay? And now there's a company, very, very successful, that looks like it could be great, and it's run by a bunch of really wild and crazy sales guys. Now, you just have to ask yourself, what's this actually going to really look like? Oh, we're going to work together. Okay, is that really going to happen? Can that really occur? And I've seen time and time again where it's just not going to happen. And think about how simple you can keep this, right? If we've got a management team, okay, and it turns out that a senior person leaves, and we're interviewing people, and we're going to interview Harrison, okay, we're going to take a lot of time to figure out how well is this guy going to fit into this, values-wise, culture-wise, ways of thinking. And we take a lot of time in doing that. But of course, when you make an acquisition, all right, and if it is going to get rolled in to the rest of the company, you're bringing in 10, 20, 50 people who may have nothing in common with you whatsoever, okay? And where this really, unfortunately, gets really bad in my mind, and I've seen this over and over again, is when you have decided that it is different. Number one, it is different than what you've been really good at, but it's such a logical extension of where the world's going that you almost have to get into that. But that's going to require you to make sure that the people that come with it stay to make sure that it happens, okay? And over time, I don't know how long ago this sort of came to my mind, but this is what I refer to when you're acquiring something. You got to be so careful, because where it usually fails is that people don't understand the island problem. And the way I've come to define the island problem, it goes a little bit like this. Let's assume that Mark and I were in the company, and Mark says to me, you know, Harry, we got to buy this thing. This is something. And by the way, Harry, take me seriously. It's not just strategic, it's economic. And here's why, and here's what it looks at, and he's got me convinced. But then we're having such a great discussion because we got a great team, we got a great culture. And I say, well, wait a minute, Mark, but what if it turns out Anthony's guy's running the company? What if Anthony leaves? Harry, he's not going to leave. Okay, I know he's not going to leave, but what if Harry, he likes our values, he gets emotional when we talk about our culture, he's not going, he's not leaving. I said, but no, Harry, I'm telling you, not going to happen. All right, okay. Well, the only question that we have to ask in my mind is, when this deal gets consummated, all right, how much does Anthony personally end up with? And I've realized if it's an 8-digit number, at least it changes, 8-digit, if it starts like anywhere like 10 million, we probably have the island problem. And the way the island problem works, and this one I did live through, is that we buy Anthony's company, and the closing is going to be in Chicago, February 1st, it's snowing. But you said to me, hey, Harry, I know you're traveling all over the world. You know, we got a $13 billion company. But Harry, it'd be really great if February 1st you're in town, because he's my guy now, and I'd like you to meet Anthony and so on. I said, all right, fine. So I show up, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. We're waiting for Anthony. It's 8, it's 9. Got to be close to noon. Where's Anthony? And you didn't know where he was. I knew where he was. He's on an island. Who would come to Chicago on February the 1st if they had $10 million? Okay? We're never going to see Anthony again. Okay? In fact, although I did correct myself, we will see Anthony again, because Anthony's there, he's got a little island, and he realized this worked out really well, and about 5 years later, he's going to create another company, okay? And he's going to come to Jack and say, hey, Jack, I'd like to get bought by you, and I love your company, and I'm very emotionally involved in the values of your company, so they can buy a larger island, okay? So thinking through, no kidding around, what are you going to do if these people don't stay? And I don't know if you've experienced this. The number of times, I've probably been on 20 boards, the number of times the CEOs made an acquisition said to me, Harry, I'm just really surprised. Ashley, you know where this is going. I'm just really surprised they left. I'm surprised you're surprised. I'm really surprised you're surprised. Why are you surprised? I mean, think about it. If Anthony wanted to work for a large company, okay, he would have worked for a large company. The reason he's got his nice little company with 50 people, 100 people, is because that's what he loves to do, okay? So you better figure out how you're going to get the right people, and the people better match, because as we talked about, it all comes down to values and people. That's exactly what it comes down to, okay? Last, if you get through those 6, you do have to get through what I call the integration problem, okay? Now, I love, by the way, Mark's comment about, you know, don't put a whole lot of confidence in any kind of synergies that go along with this. The way we describe this at Baxter is that synergy is the only 4-letter word with more letters in it, okay? That was the way we described this, okay? You just don't use this word. But at the end of the day, unless you're going to set these things up separately, and let's be honest, I mean, this was an unbelievably unique company. I mean, how ITW pulled this off is unbelievable. But for most of us, okay, you have to figure out how you're going to integrate the companies together, right? And very, very often there's this view of, well, we're going to integrate them, but it's going to take a while. How many people have been involved in acquisitions one time or another in their lives here? That's okay? All right. Think of the number of times the deal gets announced, and in the announcement it basically says, well, we're going to let everybody know what their jobs are going to be, what's going to happen, sometime over the next 9 months. Okay? Now, during that 9-month period, all the good people are gone. And again, you're surprised. All right? And here's a little equation for you that'll actually help you. There's no numbers in it, but it's a great equation for you. When I purchase Anthony's company, the one thing you know we're going to deal with, we talk about people, life, values, there's going to be change, right? They came to work for Anthony, they like what they're doing, they know what they're doing. Well, when Harry buys the company, all right, there's going to be change. Okay, well, the only constant is change. Here's the problem. Change, here's a little equation for you. Change plus uncertainty equals chaos, right? And when you buy something, I highly recommend, why do most of these go wrong, is that you don't figure out a way to minimize. You can't eliminate. You got to find a way to minimize the uncertainty. Right? So, realistic example, where it goes wrong and how I think you could solve this pretty easily. We buy Anthony's company and we make an announcement, okay, to his 100 people. Within 3 months, most of the good people have left because there's uncertainty. When you're going to buy the company, what are people concerned about? How does this impact me? How does it impact my family? Do I have to move? I mean, there's things that everybody in this room would kind of worry about if you were the person, right? Well, how about doing this a slightly different way? How about Anthony and I sit down before the announcement and I ask Anthony, you give me a list for your 100 people of the top 10 things they're most concerned about. Okay? And by the way, if you're on the board of these companies, you can learn a lot by the answer to this, by the way. So, all right, what's the question? Well, we have a manufacturing facility in Chicago and Milwaukee. Harry, what's going to happen to those facilities? Oh, okay. Well, you know what? We don't even have a plant in Chicago, so that's definitely going to stay open. The one in Milwaukee, you know what? We'll probably close that, but we can either move the people to Madison, they could come to your facility in Chicago, or you know what? Here's what the severance looks like. Here's what the retention thing is going to look like for the first 12. What's the next question? Okay. Well, the next question is, we happen to have 10 sales folks. What's going to happen to those folks? Well, let's talk about that. What's going to happen is 5 or 6 of those, based on the geographies, we absolutely have to keep. The other 4, we have a couple open positions in marketing, or here's the severance. What's the next question? Now, when I've done that with CEOs, where I learn a lot, is the CEO will say, well, Harry, we can't do that yet. Well, why can't we? Well, we don't know whether we're going to keep the plant open or not. Well, that's fascinating. What is the present value? What does the economics of the next 6 years look like if you don't know whether the plant's staying open or not? What about the sales? Well, I don't know if we need those. I don't know what's going to... Well, what did you use for selling expense in this projection? And it turns out they didn't do any kind of projections because their banker told them that paying 10 times is a pretty good deal. Okay? So this ability to minimize the uncertainty, make it as clear as you possibly can, has an enormous impact on how this looks. Right? So when I think about this, I actually believe that the approval rate or the success rate in acquisitions, if you can think about how you're going to deal with each of these 7, I think you can increase the probability from 20 almost to your 80%. This guy's fond of, okay? Because what we're going to do, we're going to really truly understand what we're good at. We're going to understand the economics. We're not going to get confused by the accounting. We're literally going to make sure that we don't get emotional, that we use bankers for what they should be doing, and we're literally going to make sure that we deal with the people issues, the cultural issues, and how the integration issues are going to work. And I think if you can do those things, the success rate will significantly higher. Okay, so I'm going to. By the way, another one. If I kept it to 7, but if I had an 8th one, never be in a hurry. Never, ever be in a hurry to do an acquisition. I highly recommend this. And where this one, I always, as the leader, is one thing I try to teach all my younger people is that they'd say, well, Harry, you got to move fast. Well, because somebody else is going to move fast. Well, you know what? We'll do the next deal. Right? The fellow that I learned a lot of this from was a senior guy in another firm, and it sounds like a crazy analogy, but we all know I love these crazy analogies. The guy lived in Evanston, and he would take the train downtown. This is like 40 years ago. And he said, you know, Harry, I want to catch the 7:07 a.m. train, and I'm coming up the platform, but I want to get my Wall Street Journal, of course, how shall we do? And I got to get a cup of coffee. Oh, the 7:07's coming. I can either start running, but wait a minute, this is a 7:18. This is a 7:25. There's always going to be another equity. And as soon as you think there's not another deal, then you're going to overpay. You're overpaying. Never be in a hurry. And of course, when the seller, the banker on the other side says, you know, you only got 3 hours, well, some idiot's going to spend a lot of money and lose a lot of money. I'm never in a hurry. I'm never in a hurry. I'm kind of a hyper guy, but I'm not in a hurry to do acquisitions. I'm never in a hurry. In fact, that was another line from that same guy, another one of my favorite lines I stole from him. He said, the best deals I ever did were the ones I didn't do. I've watched the deals I haven't done and seen what people have done with them, but that's...